Evening. Thank you guys for making it out. We know that this was short notice and not necessarily what was on the schedule, so we appreciate you guys moving things around so that you could be with us. We're also live streaming this, so there's people joining us online. So to those of you who are doing that, thanks, and go Lions if you're watching them. We don't usually live stream these meetings, but we are because we wanted to make the material and things that we're discussing this evening as available as possible. And as we've communicated and advertised, our focus is really, really simple and narrow. We want to talk about the opportunity to purchase both of the buildings in our complex. And so what we want to do, what the elders hope to do in this time this evening is to communicate with you what the opportunity is and what it would mean. We'll talk about some sort of ideas for moving forward with that. We're not here this evening to say, we must do this. That's not what we're saying. We're here to convey and to communicate with you. And our hope is that as we communicate with you, that you will be able to communicate with us. We want to hear what your thoughts are, what you've been praying for, things that God has put on your heart, and what your thoughts are based on the information that we're going to communicate with you. And we want you to know that your voice plays a significant role in the elders trying to determine what God is up to. An opportunity is not the same as God's call. They're not the same thing. And so what we want to know is, what is God doing? That's the question that we're going after. What kind of doors is he opening? Where is he leading us? And so we're hoping that through your communication with us that we will be able to better discern that. And so there's a couple ways that you will be able to communicate with us this evening. And later we're going to have all the elders come up so you can talk with us. A couple ways that you can communicate. First of all, you can do that directly if you're here. When we get to the Q&A time, just raise your hand, ask us a question. We will do our best to answer that question. We've got both guys from our finance committee who are here. If you got questions for them, and Chris Ray over there in the corner. Chris, you want to raise your hand? He's a commercial real estate manager, guru, broker, member of our church. Great guy who's been also meeting with us and talking. And so we've got a lot of different angles that we can respond to this evening. So there'll be an opportunity to just raise your hand, ask a question. We'd love to respond that way. You can also submit a question through Slido. And obviously, if you're on the live stream, you can't ask the question here. So submit it to Slido. Go to slido.com, and there's an event code. It's CDC. And please don't shake because we said CDC. It's not that CDC. This is Coram Deo Church. So go ahead and do that, and we will respond to those when the elders come up together, and you can vote for others' questions that you want to see answered. And then lastly, we have a very brief survey we'd like to hand out. So if we want to hand that thing out now, whoever's handing that out, the survey, Krista's going to be handing this out. It's like a 5-question survey. There's no big things in it. We're just getting a general idea. And so if you would take a moment to fill that out, maybe at the end of our time, and then we'll just collect those in buckets in the foyer as you exit, and that will just give the elders some more kind of data points, some input for us to consider as we try and figure this thing out. So let me pray, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got here, and then what the opportunity is. So let me open our time in prayer. Father, you have been so kind and faithful to this church. From day one, when we had nothing and nowhere to meet, you have provided, and in each step along the way, you have opened doors when they needed to be opened, and you have closed doors when they needed to be closed. And so we are coming before you. We've had seasons of prayer and fasting, asking for your wisdom and your provision. And so now we're gathering here to try and discern what your will is for our church and for our future as it relates to facilities, real estate, and money. Your word says, if you do not build the city, that the laborers labor in vain. And we do not want to labor in vain. We want to give our work to the work that you are already doing. And so we pray that you would give us clarity this evening as to what that is. Lord, we do not have the wisdom to know what is best, but you do. We do not have the knowledge to know what the next 3, 5, and 10 years looks like, but you do. And so we are, like James says, we're asking you for wisdom, and we want to trust the wisdom that you provide. So we ask that you would provide those things this evening and more. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, I want to talk a little bit about where we've been. I know that many of you have heard our story, but some of you don't know our story, and so I briefly want to just kind of bring you up to speed. It kind of helps shape the way that we approach a situation like this. So we planted Coram Deo in 2004. July of 2004 was our very first meeting, and I wonder, is anybody here tonight that was at that very first meeting at the Grange Hall? Put your hand up if you were there. Okay, we've got my family back there, but my kids weren't even born then. Krista, you were there. Brandon was there. Tabor was there. So all of you've come since then, right? So welcome. It's your first time. So we planted in 2004, and as I said earlier, we literally had nothing. We had no money. We didn't have a budget. We didn't have a website. We didn't have a single chair. We had absolutely nothing. The only thing that we had was this commitment to the Word of God and a commitment to see people come to faith. And that was it. And from that point forward, God has always been the one who has initiated and opened and provided and directed us. We were meeting in the Grange off of Paulson Road, which is not a great place, not a welcoming place. There's no AC. We're meeting in July with no air conditioning, and it was terrible. But like 2 months into this, the owners of all of the buildings up here came to us and said, hey, we'd love to have you get in this space. We actually built all these buildings to be used for God, and there was a church meeting in this building, and we'd love for you guys to be in there. And it was like, man, wouldn't it be awesome to have space? But we had no money. So we're like, oh, that's great, but we don't have any money. And their response was, well, we don't really care. We feel like we're supposed to do this. So we will give you this building for $2,000 a month. That's what we paid rent on this building for the first couple years, was $2,000. And they said, we will escalate that payment as you are able to afford more and as you grow. And it's like, great, that's awesome. So that payment very slowly escalated. I mean, really slowly. They were very generous with us. And then they approached us a couple years into that and said, hey, we'd love to sell you the building. And again, it was like, that's really great, but we still have no money, right? We're a couple years old, and that just doesn't work for us. And they felt that God was telling them to do this. And so the owners of the building went and talked with their bank, and they figured out how they could sell us this building for a mortgage payment that would be approximately what we were paying for rent at that time, so that we would own the building and it wouldn't change our budget hardly at all. And they ended up gifting us somewhere around 35 to 40% of the building based on what the value was at that point. We were not looking for this. We were not asking for it. It was just something that God provided. In fact, if you go all the way back to before Coram Deo was even a thing, the dream and the thing that my wife and I were always talking about was Old Town Silverdale. Remember that, Azteca? Like Old Town Silverdale, there's an old church building down there, and like I grew up in that building. I was like, I wanted to be there, but that's not what God had for us. So He opened doors, He provided, and now we're at the place where we own this building outright. We don't owe anything on the mortgage. It's ours, free and clear. God has provided all of those things. We, as a church, have continued to grow. We have 3 morning services. You were here this morning for the last 2 services. There's just no room. Parking is terrible. And 3 services, like for me, because we've been doing it for so long, it feels normal. Every time I talk to somebody else, they're like, you have 3 services? That's crazy. Like, yeah, that's kind of crazy, but it's what we do because we could do it without putting any sort of burden on the church in terms of buying extra facilities and taking more mortgage on. So we have grown, and for a number of years, we kind of keep getting up to this. We're packed. And we come back a little bit, and we grow up to it, and we're doing this rubber band thing, and we've been there for a while. And so we've been, last year, asked you guys to pray and fast, that God would open up opportunities for us, and that's how the space over here opened up, in which we were able to take a lease out and move our offices over there. And so for the first time, we actually have office space for our team, which has been great. And our desire at that point was to move the offices over there and turn that space right there into a balcony. And we met with an architect, and we got some like preliminary designs and ideas of what that was going to cost. And as we looked at the cost and we looked at what it was actually going to gain us in terms of people, and we pursued launching the school, we looked at that space and just thought it's a Band-Aid solution for us. It would provide some more seating, but it would definitely be a short-term solution. And with needing as much class space as we possibly can as we start a school, getting rid of that class space didn't work well with that. And so we didn't move forward with putting that balcony in. And we'd asked you guys to continue praying. We went to a season of prayer leading up to Thanksgiving. And during that season of prayer, both of the buildings in the complex got placed on the market, and they had not been available for a number of years, and so now they are available. And so we look back and you say, God has opened doors, God has moved people in terms of financial generosity. We've never had a big capital campaign drive that I can. You guys ever remember doing that? I don't think we ever did that. We did some remodeling upstairs. So we've never really done anything like this. It's always been just God is moving, and we've tried to ride that wave. So what that does is it allows us to look at the opportunity right now without a ton of pressure, right? There's not this, we have to make this happen. This is not, I think Stuart talked about, you don't want to buy the last car on the lot, right? Because you go, if you miss it, you're out. No, it's not that. This is an opportunity, and we think this is something that could potentially work for us, but again, we want your feedback on that. So where are we at right now? We've got a school coming in 8 months. We will open our doors. We will have kids here. We've got a 9:30 and 11 o'clock service that is consistently full, and we have very little to no room for expansion. We can keep trying to twist your arm to come to the 8, but the 8 o'clock is just 8 o'clock, right? And it's a hard sell, and we understand that, and even that is a short-term solution. So we're thinking about our kids, we're thinking about grandkids, we're thinking about what kind of church are we going to leave, what legacy do we leave behind, what kind of Kitsap will we leave behind for those who come after us, and space is clearly an essential part of that equation. So these buildings got listed. I want to say were all the elders able to walk through that? Were all of us there? Was Aaron present for that? Where is he at? Aaron. So everybody minus Aaron, I think, was there for that. And Derek was busy delivering your Amazon packages. So the rest of us were there, and we also had Chris, and we had both Ben and Stuart from our finance committee, and we got to look through both of those buildings and ask questions and kind of dream and scheme about the opportunities that's there. And so what we want to do is share with you the info, the data that we have to let you know what the opportunity is. So as Kim has so accurately stated, whenever questioned by me, the current asking price for those buildings together is $4,349, right? So $4,349,000, right? It's $4 million, whatever. $4 million and some change. Give you some perspective, years ago, when the original owners, Doug and Gladys, had that building, they approached me to buy both of those buildings. And at that point, the asking price was, you ready? $800,000. That's like a starter home in East Bremerton, right? So the market has gone up. If you put your money in it, good for you. It's $4.349 million. One of the unique things about these buildings is that all of the buildings are currently occupied and they are providing a monthly rent payment, okay? So these are all properties that currently produce monthly revenue. Apria, which is the building, the end of that building right there where our offices are located, their monthly rent payment is $7,691. Northwest Beverages, which is the company that's in the far end of that building, they are the distributor. Their monthly rent is $3,750. The Hybrid Gym, which is on this side of that building, is $3,300. And then there's a little space between those two. There's a home medical business there, and their income is $2,057, and that provides a total of just under $17,000 of monthly income that is generated by the companies that are there. So that's a unique thing, because typically when you purchase a building, you're not getting that income, you're paying immediately. These are all generating monthly income right now. And that affects what it would look like for us moving forward. So I want to just present two options for you. These are the kind of the ideas that we have toyed around, the elders have discussed, Finance Committee has spoken into this. Option one for us would be to finance $2.5 million and to raise $1.5 million. Right now, there are 25-year mortgages that are available to us as a church that are currently 6.8%. Brandon, there's still that? Brandon says yes, 6.8. And that puts us at a mortgage payment of $17,462. Again, the rental income is just under 17, and if we purchased these buildings, we would not have to pay rent for our building anymore. We currently pay $39.70 for the offices over there. So when you put those numbers together, we would have a cash flow positive of $3,300. If we took out that mortgage and considering the rent, we would be ahead, meaning we would be paying $3,000 less per month if we bought both of those buildings. The second option is more aggressive on the fundraising side. It's finance $2 million and raise $2 million. Obviously, we're talking a $4 million purchase price here. I didn't say that. Finance $2 million and raise $2 million. And again, the mortgage with the same terms puts us at a mortgage payment of $13,894. Again, the rental income is $16,700. The rent saved by not having to pay rent anymore is $39.70, and our cash flow positive would be just under $7,000. So if we could buy both of those buildings at those terms, we would be saving just under $7,000 per month. So those are kind of the two things that we have been praying for and thinking through. Now, there's obvious pros and cons to both of these, and they're pretty clear. Some of the pros are these buildings are paying for themselves initially. This rental income keeps coming in, it pays the mortgage, and it would allow us to have additional space long term. I think there are about 22,000 square feet between the two of them. Is that right, Brandon? About more or less 22,000 square feet between the two of them. So we'd have a lot of space. It would triple the amount of space that we have. Right now, we're dealing with 10,000 square feet. We would go to 32,000 square feet with both of those buildings. We would own the entire parking lot, which would mean we wouldn't necessarily have these vans taking up 8 spots in the middle of our parking lot, getting their tires changed on Sunday night. And the other thing it does, and this is big, it allows us to acquire space as we need it and we can afford it, okay? So if we bought the buildings day one, we just stay where we're at. We're either close to cash neutral or we're positive. And as we have money to acquire responsibility, we move a tenant out and we acquire that space, we move in, and we're allowed to do that incrementally, meaning we can go, hey, we're going to put a sanctuary over here. We raise the money, we go in, we do it, we grow, we expand. We're going to move something into this space. So we can grow into it incrementally, and the space that we're not currently using or occupying continues to generate rental income for us. Some of the cons to moving forward would be, right now we're not landlords, and we would have to become landlords. We would have to work with these tenants and be collecting money from them. The spaces are relatively new. They're very simple. They're just boxy spaces, but none of the spaces were designed to be a church or to be used for anything that we want to use them for, which means anytime we would move into a space to occupy it, there would have to be some sort of remodel that took place to make it usable for us. Our unofficial guesstimate, if we were to occupy the beverage space over in the corner, or if we were to occupy the Apria space over here and turn it into a large sanctuary, Ryan did some of the data on the square footage, and we'd be looking at just under or around 400 seats. Is that accurate? 400 seats. We have 220 in here, to give you perspective. 220 seats in here. We'd be closer to 400 seats. But it would take some money to do that, to prepare that space for it. And so our unofficial guesstimate would be you're probably looking around $300,000 to remodel that space to make it work for us, because none of it was designed to be used by a church. Another con would be that if we do this, even though that we have rental income coming into us, at the end of the day, we're the ones that are responsible for that mortgage payment if those businesses should fold and walk away. So that is a very real responsibility that we need to be aware of. And perhaps the biggest con to all of this is that in both of these options, it requires a significant down payment up front. Right now, there is a contingent offer on the table to the owner, which means if we were going to move forward, it would have to be in a most likely a smaller time frame, which means we wouldn't have a ton of time to raise that money, and that's a fairly aggressive move. So we would have to figure out, how do we raise the money? How do we, and we're predominantly a blue-collar church, how do we raise a significant amount of capital in order to make that happen? So those are some of the cons that we have to be aware of and consider. So with that being said, there's a couple things I want you to know. I have said this from the front so many times, we do not want to burden the church body with massive debt. We don't want to do that. We've never done that. We won't do that. That's not the way we want to do things. We also don't want to become a church that is constantly raising money to make things happen, right? Some of you have been in that situation before, and that gets old really, really quick. So as we're looking at the situation and thinking about how would you raise $1.5 or $2 million in a short amount of time, indulgences are, no, I'm kidding. That wasn't on the notes. Super effective. For me, I'm not speaking on behalf of the elders now. You're just hearing, these are my thoughts. There are moments where God just moves. There's Red Sea moments where you have no idea how you're going forward, and God opens it up and you go through. There are Jericho moments where you spend a couple days walking around shouting and praying and singing, and God does things. A story that we come back to with our staff all the time is we've got a couple loaves and we got a couple fish, and there's a couple thousand people to feed, and this is all that we have. And if we're trusting what we have with God, and this is what he wants to do, then he will do it. How does he do that? I don't know. I have no idea. But we're in a situation that's like that. It's a we're acknowledging we got a couple fish and we got a couple loaves, right? We're acknowledging there's a Red Sea, and if he doesn't open it up, like, we're not building a cruise ship. That's not happening. He's got to open it or we're done. So it's a moment where there's a lot of peace in that, to know that either God opens the door or he doesn't. Either he blesses the loaves and the fish or he doesn't. Either he calls Lazarus out of the tomb or he doesn't. This is not something that we can somehow make happen in a short amount of time, but it is certainly something that he can make happen. And something that we talked about on one of our Sunday mornings when the elders get together before the service is like, God tells us we have not because we ask not. Right? And I'm not a prosperity guy at all. You should know that by now. But that verse is in the Bible. And sometimes God calls us into these seasons of intense prayer where we ask God to do something. So any type of moving forward for us as a church to pursue these options is going to look like that. It's going to look like prayer. It's going to look like fasting. It's going to look like gathering the loaves and the bread that we do have and bringing those things before God and saying, hey, God, what are you going to do here? And you're going to multiply it or you're not. So that's the way that I think that we are thinking as elders. So what I want to do is invite all the elders up. You guys come on up. And we're going to open this up for Q&A. That is a heavy music stand. And like I said earlier, raise your hand, ask a question, or there's Slido. If you want to do that, you can do that. If you're online, definitely submit those questions via Slido. Don't submit them on the live stream because I don't have access to that live stream right now, but I do have access to Slido, and we'll see all of those questions. But fire away. This will be one of the rare times that we meet and nobody asks about baptism. So that's really cool. So, ladies first. Becca.
When's our next baptism?
Let's go walk outside.
Yeah, just go outside right now. It's raining.
What would it look like to be a landlord in that? What kind of administrative extra would be needed if there's a leak in the roof with one of our tenants? Who comes up with the funding to fix that, et cetera?
Yeah, so the question was, who's the landlord, and if there are...
If we're the landlord,
Yeah.
what kind of extra administrative, I mean, how much extra work is it going to be for our current administrators like Nettie and Krista and whoever to manage taking payments or whatever is needed to manage, to be a landlord?
Okay.
Secondly, where does the money come from for repairs and whatever is needed
Yep.
as property owners?
So the two questions. One, who does the administrative piece of collecting the rent? And if there's a leak in the roof, where does the money come to fix that?
As owners,
As the owners, we're responsible for that. Where does that money come from? So I'm going to have you talk about the administrative thing. And do you want to talk about the triple net as well?
Yeah. So as far as my desire, and this is me, not all the elders, but I would be very interested in getting Chris Ray's professional services to oversee those rentals for us. Whenever we have a problem, I call Chris, and he has magical vendors that show up and do stuff, and then we get a bill. And I would just want to make that a little more formal. But he's very skilled. He knows the stuff inside and out, and he's a professional in that area. And so whether that was a formal relationship or I'm texting him far too often, I would be looking to his leadership in that regards for the necessary vendor management. But when you start to get to something that's larger with multiple tenants, it is valuable to have some of that outsourced. And as far as like payments and that type of stuff, like we currently have auto pay sent off to the landlord, and it goes into the accounting system. Something similar, I imagine, would exist Everyone except for the gym is a larger corporation that has small offices here, kind of a regional approach. And so we are actually working with larger organizations. As far as the maintenance or facilities expenses, there's a feature called triple net that gets added on to the lease. So we pay, I think it's $270. We pay around $500 to $600 triple net each month, which goes into a honeypot of expenses. And so if we had a facilities leak in the building where the gym is, those businesses would be paying a monthly triple net fee to pay for the ongoing costs of the facilities. And then if those expenses increase every year, that triple net is recalculated based off of estimated expenses. And so the real expenses get dispersed back to the tenants. And so there's a little bit of protection there from us being ultimately stuck with a bill. Part of a conversation I had with our next door neighbors, Apria, their plumbing is broken right now. $4,000 bill. They're trying to bill Apria, and Apria is trying to bill triple net. So ultimately, they're going to pay for it later through monthly payments, but those fees do get paid out by each tenant. Did I answer that for you? Okay.
And to clarify one thing, those numbers do not represent the triple net fees.
Correct.
That is simply rent, and all the tenants pay additional monthly fees that go into that pool to pay for improvements on the buildings.
And so to add on, what would be an estimated expense for, like having Chris Ray be a management? Like, is that gonna be a significant number that?
I don't know that number, and I don't know if he desires us, but the question is, what would it cost for a real estate broker to manage a piece of estate for us? I don't know that. We've never explored that. Between triple net income that we would receive, I know we'd have the ability to pay that, and we would just loop it in and charge it back to them. Thank you.
Good question. Okay, I think you had your hand up, Tristan, and then we'll go over here.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, what other means of growing our space have we considered besides buying these other buildings? Recognizing that we have a need to grow.
Yeah.
What other means of doing that? Besides
Yeah.
balcony, obviously, I know about like.
Yeah. So the question was, what other opportunities outside of these buildings have we pursued to provide space for growth? I'm going to hand that off to Derek.
Everything. We've exhausted a lot of things over the years. I mean, this isn't just, as I said in one of our meetings, I said, we've been kicking this can down the road long enough. We need to start talking about what this really means about pursuing these buildings. We have thought about, looked at all kinds of spaces across this county, and there just isn't another next step building that fits our needs. And so and we always had inclinations thinking these buildings would be perfect, because, well, proximity, all that stuff. And when this opportunity arose, well, it's time to at least investigate this, and that's why we're here tonight, obviously. So we're always hoping for a big building to show up in our lap, always, right? And that would be perfect to have a big space and say, here you go. But that currently just doesn't exist in this county. There just isn't the next step building right now. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, one thing that came to my mind, the reason I asked the question, I've heard of like some churches that have really nice buildings but don't have congregations that are growing, or they're even dwindling.
Yep.
There's been like kind of, I don't know about mergers, or there's been some sort of thing that's happened to kind of.
Right. We have talked to other churches, and yeah, we have talked to other churches. I won't say who or anything, but and it just hasn't worked out. So they're not interested, or it just won't work out. So.
And I did approach a local church that has a nice old big building that we maybe did a anniversary party at for 15 years, and that's not an option. Chris Ray and I have been looking at spots for years. There's the old WorkSource building off of Sylvan, which is 30,000 square feet or something. tons of parking, but Stuart, you walked it with us, and it's broken up in like the worst way for a church to meet. It just would not work. Chris and I walked through the old Silverdale State Bank, which then got turned into Silverdale Antiques on Silverdale Way. It's about 11,000 square feet-ish. And if we got, I think that was like 2.5 million is the asking price. And there's a huge vault in the middle that you'd have to remove to make it work. But if we bought that, we would get a sanctuary and nothing else. There's no other space. Pier 1 Imports. It's like, wonderful location in the middle of Silverdale. And Hobby Lobby bought the Toys R Us, and they're closed on Sunday, and we'd have great parking. It's 3.2 million, and what you're getting for that is a sanctuary. So there just aren't a lot of spaces in the community that are available. Whenever something comes up, Chris will text me, I'll text him. We know if it's worth looking at, we will look at it, but we've been doing that for years and just... Yeah,
And those buildings are $1 million renovation or more. Like Pier 1 doesn't have sprinkler systems, and that's going to run you at least $300,000.
Correct.
And all that to say, you'll end up $4 million all in, but it's still not meeting all the needs of our church. One other thing is we have talked with architects about expanding the walls to go larger, which then triggers many things with the county. And so we have kind of tried to explore as many options as we could creatively think of. But right now, this is a legitimate option, whether or not it turns into something, but this is an option before us.
It is an option. All right, I'm going to do a question off of Slido, and I think you're best to do this. Does becoming landlords affect our nonprofit status?
No. We would be in jeopardy of our nonprofit status if we chose to give tenants significant discounts where they're paying below fair market rent. That would put at risk our nonprofit status. Us renting space to businesses is not something that would trigger it's considered a reasonable cost. It's not a profitable cost in managing a business.
All right, I'm going to do another question off of Slido. Other local churches should want to support the academy and facility growth for that purpose. Has this been looked into? The premise of that is not accurate. So there's not a bunch of churches that want to support our school.
But there's conversations that could be had, but there are conversations we could have, but there is it's kind of like a chicken egg situation.
Yeah.
Like once I don't think the school could do it by itself right now in its current state. The church does it, then we can actually maybe have some leverage
in the future.
In the future.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like a timeline.
The starting this school is a particular philosophy. It's a commitment to education, and most churches that share that are already doing something like that or providing something for their congregation. So, all right, Mr. Crawford.
2 questions.
Only one. Unless you got 2 million, then you get 2.
Well, that's funny because that's one of my questions.
Ah.
What is your approximation of how long you have to raise the money? And second question, have any of the buildings been inspected, or is there a plan to do that? Or just if there's other issues other than property as one issue?
Yeah. What was the first question, Tim?
How long do we have to raise the money?
Okay. Yeah, so the question was, how long do we have to raise the money, and then have we had them inspected? So the buildings came on the market the end of November-ish, and so we wanted to look at them immediately, but we didn't feel like we could do a good job of having this meeting in the middle of December. So we've tried not to go down that road until we could talk to the body. We didn't want to make financial commitments to figuring things out until we could talk to the whole church body. So I don't think we're at a place to answer that, like what's the time frame for raising that money that you're getting at. When we looked at the buildings, there were a number of upgrades that the owner had done. And one of the positives to the way these buildings are built is they're basically concrete blocks. which means there's not a whole lot of things inside to go wrong. There are things that can go wrong, but you don't have like rotting wood because of leaks, or these are very simple, basic buildings. So the maintenance on them is simplified because of that. We would certainly have everything inspected before we were making any sort of financial commitments, but we're just not at that.
And the bank would require that.
Of course, yeah, yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if any of that had happened as far as the inspection
Yeah.
and also the timeframe.
Chris, would you mind speaking on the spot here for a moment? We'll bring you. You looked at the buildings with us, and you managed buildings in Kitsap. What is your? Just give us a quick assessment of the condition of the buildings.
So one of the buildings is actually in better condition. This one right here, where Apria is, that one to me, when I looked at it, was in much better condition than the other one. The other one is a little rougher. The build out's a little rougher. It hasn't been maintained as well. So there's that. I didn't see any major issues. I think probably we need to dive into that a little more with, an inspection. If you did move forward with a feasibility study, typically a feasibility study is going to be between 60 and 90 days. So that gives you the opportunity to get your people in and take a look, and whoever we decide to take a look at the buildings and give us an assessment. So that really helps a lot. The bank's going to want that. So at the $4.3 million price, I think it's a little overpriced. It's $183 a square foot, so that's kind of up around there. But the market with the way the warehouse space is in the county has always been better lately in the last 3 years. It's really hard to find warehouse space. So that's a huge positive, because down the road, if we were to lose a tenant or something, maybe we would look at another tenant that's looking for some warehouse space that would fit well, the roll-up doors, things like that. You can drive a forklift through there. There's a lot of different things you can do. And it being open is really a value to someone coming in if we didn't need the space. So overall, I think the buildings are in pretty good shape. Like I said, this one, I think that one would be more usable for you in the future, closer to your timeline, I think you're thinking about, versus the other one. So I wanted to say something about triple nets a little bit, so I can kind of clear that up, because that was a good explanation, but I know a little more about it, so I'd like to kind of expand it a little bit. So triple net charges are charges that are charged to the tenants, and they include management. So if you do bring a manager on, those are charges that you can charge back to those tenants. Now, sometimes with net charges, you can kind of price yourself out of the market just because, they're so high. But in this particular case with warehouse space, you don't have that because, those net charges are actually pretty low. I think you guys are around $6 a square foot or something. Is that something like that? So, when you're looking at net charges, it's a different line item. So you're paying your base rent. The tenant's paying their base rent, and they're paying their net charges, which covers water, sewer, garbage, your maintenance charges, things of that nature. So if you do have a tenant that has like a plumbing issue like these guys over here do, I think you need to take a look at the lease. And what the lease says is what you follow. So if, for instance, if that tenant is responsible for the interior of their space, then that would be a tenant issue, a plumbing issue, and that wouldn't even come out of your net charges. That would be their responsibility. If it's a building issue, if it's a water leak that's coming underground or in a wall or from the roof, then that's something that the landlord would get into. But, those net charges are there, and like Brandon said, they're adjusted yearly, so they can fluctuate, they can go up and down. So it's a good thing, because really if your maintenance issues fluctuate and go up and down, then you can charge those back to the tenants. It does. It does, yeah, but 501c3 doesn't pay taxes, right? So actually, those net charges actually may go down because you're not adding that in to that rate. So I'm pretty sure they're included in that right now. Yeah. So that would be a benefit for the tenants, really.
Yeah.
A huge benefit, and then you could afford management.
Thanks, Chris.
You swing by with your helicopter every once in a while and check things out for us. Okay, I'm going to do a question off here, and then we'll clip over here. It says, we're running into difficulty hitting our budget already. If we bought the buildings and at some point could not make the payments, what is the backup plan? It's a good question. Who wants to take that? Well, we had a summer, I think that's the first summer slump we've had in years in terms of the giving. So the giving dipped down, and last time we had a family meeting, we talked about that, and we had some accounting things we had to figure out. Finance guys, you can speak into this, but we hit budget in December.
Yeah.
We hit budget November. We're under a little bit. October we hit budget,
Yes.
and I think September we hit budget.
We were a little under September.
Okay, so that slump thing that we had in the summer, I think that we're coming out of that. We're not seeing that necessarily continue.
And with that, we've also seen the slump of our attendance come back, where our attendance is running, on average, the highest we've had.
Yeah.
Which the trend is often increase in attendance, and then an increase in giving and generosity follows that. It lags behind it. But one of the things with the facilities is, in the income stream, is that depending on how much is fundraised, we have a inflow of cash for the management and needs that come up. We haven't gotten into detail on the priority of how we would use those funds, but I'm very confident we would not expense those funds immediately. We would be sitting on them for kind of the what-if situations, which I think would come into that. But with the tenant situation, what we do know of the existing tenants is that all of them actually want to continue in the space. If anything, they actually want more space within these facilities, and they've just never been given more space. And so based off of being the larger organizations, they've kind of established themselves as a off-site office here for administration, and are not looking to relocate unless they're forced to.
Okay, finally, thank you for being so patient.
I'm not sure, but what's the term on the leases for the general business? Like they're 1 year, 2 year, 3 year terms on the renters that are in these various buildings? How long do they run?
Yeah.
Because you have to abide by whatever term they are in.
Yeah, repeat the question.
What are the existing lease terms for the existing tenants? So Priya, on your right, next to our church office, they have a little over 3 years left in their lease. Northwest Beverages, their administration has them following a 1-year lease that gets renewed every year, but they desire to stay longer, but their upper management is only doing 1-year leases. And the gym and the medical are on a 2-year lease.
Good question. Does that answer the question for you? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So what would it look like for the businesses around us if we were to buy the buildings that they're in? Would they be leaving, or would we just be charging them rent? What would that look like for them?
You guys want to take that?
Yeah, so the question was, what would it look like for the businesses if we were to take over as landlords, correct? Yeah. Well, at first it would not mean anything. They would stay there. We would continue their leases. I don't think we have any hopes to break anybody's leases. The real advantage for us would be we'd be able to get into the space without having to carry the cost of the mortgage ourselves, which is one of the things that them sticking around and it sounds like they're committed, good tenants who are hoping to stick around as long as there's a space to have. And that would allow us to then, as John mentioned earlier, get into the space incrementally over time as we're able to afford to move in. But there's no plan to kick anybody out. There's no plan to, take over immediately and get in and break a lease or anything like that. It would be, evaluating as leases come to an end, and then going forward from there with whatever makes sense for us in terms of what we can afford and need, and what makes sense to do as a landlord for them. So, does that answer your question? Yeah, you bet.
So there's a downside to that because it doesn't immediately alleviate space.
Yeah, it doesn't. We wouldn't be getting in day one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the upside is that you've got 20,000 square feet to grow in over the next, 1 to 2 decades, and that's the
Yeah, we're trying to take the long-term
Yeah.
look here, and part of the long-term look is like, 800. What was it? 800,000 when they offered. They
Yeah.
said it before. If you think 4.4 is expensive now, think about 10 years from now. Like, there's a strong possibility that we all might look back and be like, if we decide not to do it, man, with 4.4, that was a steal. Like,
Yeah.
So that's the other thing we got to keep in mind is thinking not just about what is happening at the moment, but generationally. Like, the fact that we own our building outright means something for the generations that are going to come after us. Like, they're not going to have to pay rent. They're not going to have to figure that out. They're not going to have to, do a lot of the things that we have sacrificed to do over the years. And so the question needs to be not just what do we do for the immediate needs, but how do we bless the generations going forward that will come after us at Coram Deo and take up the torch. So.
Good question. All right, Tabernator. You got 143 million. You can ask all of them. Otherwise, the first one's free.
If you had a sanctuary of 400-ish, what does the parking lot actually hold?
Yeah.
Because I think with 220, we're pretty well jam-packing that thing as it is. And then the part two of the first question, because I'm only asking one question.
This is $1 million question, Tabor. Tread lightly.
We're talking about planting the church in Volvo or North Kitsap.
Yeah.
How does this play into that, or how does that, scrap that, and just all stay here for a while? Or?
Yeah. Let me deal with I'll answer the parking one, and then I'm gonna kick off you or someone else. And there's a question for you, Aaron, here about the plant thing. So we still have limited spaces in our parking lot if we buy everything. One of the benefits are if we are occupying a large sanctuary space over there, we are also displacing some of the parking in the parking lot. We own the whole parking lot, so we can determine how we use it. So there would be a gain of parking space to do that. As far as longer-term options for more significant parking, we have talked about having staff and volunteers and members parking in the parking lot that's adjacent over there, which is open on Sundays. And the development over here, I believe there's an offer on that as well on this space, and this will be commercial, think like Ross Plaza-ish type things. And so our hope is that we could divert some parking into that as well, that would allow us to park more people at a service. It doesn't increase our parking lot, but there are other spots that we can procure. And we've also talked about, do we have to get as creative as leasing the parking ride from Kitsap Transit on Sundays and have a bus to bring people in here? Because anytime you're looking at trying to seat more people, it's like you have a space issue and you have a parking issue. And there's some really great parking spots with no buildings, and then there's buildings with no parking, and it's really hard to thread the needle on both of those, so you have to get creative sometimes on one of them. And so those are some of the creative options that we have explored. The other question was about planting. I'm going to give that to...
Yes, so the plant hasn't, the North Kitsap plant vision has not been scrapped. It has been put on pause, partly because of competing priorities, namely the school. So that's still, in my mind, in our mind, is still in the future. And we've never thought about the plant in terms of church growth, like mitigation. It's a plant, right? We need, the space here needs to, the thought isn't that half the church goes to North Kitsap. There will definitely be people who go because there'll be people who are, transplanted, but that we've never seen that as this instead of that. Different goals.
Yeah, and just to clarify that a little bit, one of the things that we discussed at our last elder meeting was, our vision is saturate, gospel saturation in Kitsap. That's on the wall in there. That has not changed, but we have talked about how do we go about doing that. And when we've discussed the idea of planting campuses, there is a significant administrative lift in order to do that in terms of volunteer management and organization, which can take a lot of resources and attention away from Mama Church, if you will. And so we've talked about continuing to continue with that vision to see churches planted, but approaching it in terms of how do we, can we create a residency where we bring guys who want to plant churches into Coram and let them incubate here and train them and develop them and then send them out to plant, where we're helping to support them planting, but we're not planting another Coram. We're doing what we're called to do here, but we also want to facilitate and support people who are also like-minded who want to plant in the community. So the end goal hasn't changed, but how we get there has changed a little bit. Does that answer the question? One and two of 143? Okay. Okay, here's a question for you, Aaron. Why don't you have a beard?
Oh,
It's literally
They
here.
didn't ask him.
I've tried. No one wants to see it. It's better for everybody.
That's my answer too.
All right. Maybe less Monster would. I don't know. It's coffee. I don't know. All right. What happens if we raise a lot of money and we don't end up moving forward with this purchase? Where does all that money go? Not the helicopter pad. Who wants to take that?
Who wants to take what?
That question. Don't take the money. Take the money and run. So if we raise money and it doesn't go through, that's a very real possibility because there is another option on the table. The guy wants to sell it. He has every right to sell it for the most amount of money he can get to it. So that's his thing, and that's fine. If this opportunity doesn't work out, it does not change the fact that we need space. So if this falls through, we have to start working on plans to get more space no matter what. Does that make sense? So we have to go down this road. If it's this option or if it's another option, we have to figure that out. So that's probably how we would approach it. Mike, you got your hand up?
So if we're looking into the idea of raising a bunch of money to buy facilities that, one, we can't immediately use, two, would require major renovations in order to get it to the point where we could actually use, why wouldn't we entertain the idea of looking at purchasing property and building?
So,
If we're gonna raise a load of money,
yeah.
why wouldn't we look at that?
So the question is, if we're going to try and load a raise. This is what happens to do 3 services in the morning. When you try and raise a load of money to buy buildings that we would then have to also remodel to make usable, why would we not think about purchasing land and building on it?
Kitsap County is very difficult to work with. The permits and requirements in remodeling a building will be significantly less than new construction and development. The reason this is still barren behind us is because the existing owner got hit with a big pause by Kitsap County in developing and moving forward, and is trying to sell it as a result of it. And so there's definitely more that comes with brand new construction in costs, requirements, timelines, regulations, and stress than what would come with renovations.
Yeah, and so on top of that, the development prices, like Brandon said, are super high. But if we went that route, we would be 100% responsible for that mortgage payment day one. Whereas if we go this route, we're able to grow into that incrementally as we're able. And even though you're spending money to remodel, you're still not responsible for, a building is probably going to be north of like $5 million. And so you're responsible for that day one. The mortgage payment on $5 million is somewhere around $35,000 a month. That's like half of our budget. So that would be the reason that we would pursue something like this. Okay. Heiner, will you ask the question in German first and then in English? Ah!
I was looking at the attendance for the last couple of months and literally divided it by two for adults. And it came out to be about 150 families. Namely, that would be 300 adults in a service. So has that been considered in your thinking of being able to raise sufficient funds because you take the 150 or if it climbs to 200 families and there's a monthly requirement, then you can sort of take that, divide it in, and you have to get that's sort of the average donation that you would need.
Yeah. Brandon, so the question was, we looked at how many families roughly come here and kind of divided what we need to raise by the families to see where we would be at. And you had the numbers right before our meeting.
Yeah, if we had 100 households that donated $20,000, that would be $2 million. Check my zeros there.
I was thinking of it like on a monthly basis or versus a year basis, or where's that 20,000 figure? I mean, people don't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless the existing owner is very generous, I would not imagine that he would give us 12 months in fundraising. I don't want to lead with a month number to him and try to, if we place an offer, try to get as much time as we can. But as we discussed, at least John and I, part of the demographics within our church, we do have a younger congregation, and the liquidity of $20,000 sitting around to make a donation may not be as common within a young blue-collar congregation. But we also don't know necessarily what the Lord is trying to do, and we don't know what the Lord has within his church family either. And so, but the reality of it is the $2 million has to become $2 million cash for us to donate it, whether it is something that comes through savings accounts, through investment funds, through other creative means. So it's kind of maybe a long way or maybe a sideways way of answering your question, but that's my response.
Yeah, one of the big difficulties is because there's an offer on the table, we're not in a position to go, we've got a 3-year goal, which is typically how these things work, where you raise this money. That's probably not an option for us, which is why it feels a little bit like God's going to have to do something really big here, and if he doesn't, like, that's okay. That's not his plan right now. But we wanted to talk with it, as a body, because we need to know where you guys are, what you're thinking, what you're sensing. So it's a good question, Heiner. Jeff.
I just got a question on the occupancy. If you're talking about sanctuary in one of these buildings, you're switching a warehouse to an occupied space. Does anybody contact the fire department? There's a lot of cost involved to transfer from warehouse to occupied. Have you talked to Kitsap County and the fire department to make sure that you have enough parking spots even after everybody's gone?
Yeah.
Because when you occupy that, how many are they going to let you have in that sanctuary? Are you going to end up with 3 services again because you have that many people in the building? Right now you're at 193 in this building. And I'm sure we stressed that earlier.
That occupancy
is not accurate.
I was like, is there something wrong with the mic? Nope. Yeah. Yeah. What's yeah. Yeah. So the question had to do with occupancy and parking and how many seats we can fit into that. Yeah. Yeah. We don't have the answer to that right now. That's a great question. And it's one of the reasons we're doing this right now. We have intentionally not put a ton of time resources into these things because we wanted this to happen on the front end to hear from you guys. But that's, yeah, it wouldn't make any sense for us to do that if they're like, oh, your occupancy is 270 seats. I'm like, well, we could do that with a balcony if we had to. So, yeah, that's a great question. We'd have to figure out, what would it take to turn a warehouse space into sanctuary space in terms of occupancy? The good thing is they're all sprinklered. There's not that. Like Brendan said earlier, we looked at the Pier 1 Imports building, which was not sprinklered. I don't know how that's possible. But yeah, hundreds of thousands. Chris Ray had? Okay, Chris Ray.
That would probably be part of the feasibility when we went through it. We checked with Mike Six, the fire marshal, to get him out here, have him take a look. So part of that feasibility study would include what can we do with that building, and we kind of conquered that one right, before we moved any further.
Yeah.
To repeat, the feasibility study would answer that for us. I do know with working with the fire department in the instances we've had to here, the space that we have around the entire facility is larger than normal for that. And so that's been a benefit that they've always mentioned to us, is that we actually have a lot of access for them to come in to this business complex compared to others. But feasibility study, yes.
So the question was, how do we go from we're maxed out to moving into additional space, removing the renters, and there's a financial piece to that, right? So as we've looked at those buildings, the Northwest Beverage building over there is roughly the same square footage as Apria over here. Apria has a longer lease and brings in twice as much money per month as the beverage. So if we were at the point where like, hey, we want to build the sanctuary in the far end of that building, the rent payment that we would take on at that point would be, we have a slide where it says, I think it's like it's $3,000 a month, $3,300 a month.
$3,750.
Northwest Beverage, $3,750. So we would become responsible for that amount of the payment. And if we had positive cash flow in terms of the rental, it would be coming out of that. But so we would become responsible for that portion of the rent or that portion of the mortgage, and then also to raise the money for the remodel. Does that answer your question, Ross? I think so. Okay. Other questions?
So is it that building that is contingent already?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
And let's say, is this an all or nothing thing for us? Are we willing to do only the two, or are we willing to go for one?
He only wants to sell both.
But would he sell one to us and one to somebody else? Is that what you're asking?
Well, yeah, I was wondering if that was.
Yeah.
We haven't explored that. The question is, would he sell one to a different customer and one to us? Possibly. We haven't explored that. The existing contingent offers on both buildings.
All right, we're going to do a question from Slido. If we purchase these buildings, would we also move forward with the $80,000 balcony remodel or would we remodel one of those buildings for a larger sanctuary? Anyone can take that.
I believe the answer is no. We would not be doing the balcony if we did that.
Correct. Yeah. We wouldn't want to put a significant amount of cash into a solution that would be a very short-term solution for us. Miss Lisa. Is there anticipation?
Is there an anticipation of there being income from the school once it's underway? Yes, once it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem as well, because you have to have space and teachers in order to have the level where you're starting to see significant income, and then that income is also working on facility stuff, but also feeding into your scholarships as well. So there's yes, but that's further down the road than the first 2 years, probably.
And the Coram Deo Church organization would not be seeing Coram Deo Academy's income as something that is accessible to us. That would be any type of income the school generates goes to fund and operate the school.
There could potentially become.
If the church charged the school rent or maintenance, then the school would have the funds to pay for that.
Lisa, does that answer your question? Okay, there was one over here. Yeah, Kevin.
I'm just reflecting a little bit on the Roxy situation. I know we were in different circumstances then, and kind of wanted to see if maybe our mindset has changed. It was my understanding that we hadn't paid off this building yet. We're looking at the Roxy, and ultimately decided financially, being smart, not taking on a ton of debt, let's pay this building off. I guess I'm thinking, is there just more of a pressure to expand and take on this ton of debt? So is there similarities, I guess, in our mindset financially speaking, or has it changed, I guess, a little bit differently? Financially speaking, are we changing mindsets from years ago where we're looking at?
Yeah. Or so are we changing mindsets in terms of being conservative with cash? Is that kind of what you're getting at with the money? Yeah. So there's a couple of issues. So I would say no, we're not changing in our mindset. We have outgrown the space. And we've talked about, like, you got a wedge of a lemon or an orange, right? And you're trying to squeeze all the juice out. And it's like, we've been doing that for a long time. There just is no more space. And so we're trying to address that challenge of providing more space. And there's no way to do that apart. And I mean, so God could give us a building and a church could say, we want you to have this. That could happen. We can pray for those things, but those aren't necessarily plans or strategies. So we're trying to figure out how do we provide more space as we grow. And the thing that is attractive about this solution is that these buildings are paying for themselves in terms of the mortgage with the rent payment. So we're not taking on a large mortgage payment from day one. Whereas if we were to build a large building or to buy land and develop, we would be responsible for that for day one. We're not entertaining that option at all because of the financial piece to it. What's attractive about this is that you have to raise that down payment, but once you have that building, the tenants are paying for it. And does that make sense? So it allows you to incrementally occupy space as opposed to go, hey, we got to cover a $20,000 mortgage payment now. Does that?
Yeah, it does.
It's kind of like, you've got a budget and your family grows, and it's like, okay, you got to feed more kids. You've got more space. You're driving. Like, it's those kinds of things that you can't necessarily neglect. So we've felt the space issue for a long time, and we're trying to address that issue without necessarily busting the bank.
And compared to when we were considering the Roxy some years ago, the Roxy would have provided us a sanctuary solution, but we would have had to also acquire the building next to it to renovate that for a kids an office area, and there's 0 parking in downtown Bremerton. So
Right.
there was that, what that was presenting was just strictly a worship center, a sanctuary solution. And that's what we also face with many facilities that we look at, is they may offer one aspect of our needs, but the others are usually lacking. And in this situation, we have a lot of the items are addressed with the needs that we have in our congregation.
And that makes sense, like, this is such a, it's a unique position to be in, to
Yeah.
have this meeting. You know, we never had an official meeting about any other building.
Yeah. Yeah, good question. Okay, I'm going to do one, and then we got some more back there. Would planting another church versus making this one larger do a better job at furthering the kingdom?
Maybe, maybe not. Planting another church that is Coram Deo Church in another location, like a campus like that, does introduce a lot of administrative duties that would be completely different than what we're dealing with right now in the regards of staffing, volunteer management, administration, all that type of stuff. So I don't have a good answer other than maybe, but we also have this in front of us right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I add to that, I think we're making assumptions that planting a church means we're splitting this church up. That may not happen. Planting a church could be anywhere in the world, right? It could be anywhere in the country. It could be down in another part of the county. That individual is planting a church there, and some of you might go. But he's trying to plant a church there, wherever the location is. So he's trying to preach the gospel in that particular location and draw people from that community. So that's going to draw attention from that community. Coram Deo is unique. We're in the middle of the county in a sense, and we attract a lot of people from all over the county. There is that unique aspect to Coram Deo. And we would love to see the ethic of Coram Deo go across the county. And we hope that happens. But for now, this is the opportunity we have now as this church is. And honestly, this church, the way it's structured, is a beacon of light, isn't it? I mean, you talk to people all the time, wherever you live, about Coram, and people have heard about it, right? Well, I've heard of Coram. You've heard that. I've heard that. And I live in Port Orchard. And so there's something about that gets out. And it's not just about our size. It's about how well we do things. Make sense? And so for someone to plant a church, it's just replicating that. It's not necessarily that he's one of us or whatever. It could be, but it doesn't necessarily mean that is that person. But that person's trying to preach the gospel faithfully there in that location. And we'd be in support of that, obviously. So I don't know if that helped, but I ramble a lot.
I would just say yay for church planting, yay for growing the continuing what we're doing here.
Yeah, it's not an either or. Yeah. Okay, there were hands. Over here, and then I got you, Tim.
As I'm sitting here with my wife and thinking about all this, and how wonderful it would be to have all buildings and this whole campus and all we could do at the church and expand the gospel. But the realities of it, from what I'm hearing is, we would have to come up with a significant amount of money in a reasonably short period of time, because there's another offering. We generally have an idea how much money. We also have a general idea of how many families are in this church. And if you start dividing it up to find out what would it cost a family, even to make it feasible to come up with the cash we need, is it feasible? Is it in reality? And I did a chart, 300 families at 2 million, you're talking about 7,000 a family. We need to know some idea what it's going to take for us to be able to do this realistically. And if it's so far beyond our abilities as families to do it, I'm afraid, unless God intervenes in some way I don't know about, provides benefactor, is it realistic given the cost?
Yeah, so the question is, given the time frame and the money that needs to get raised and the number of families here, is it realistic? And so just to we all share that same concern. We are not here tonight saying we need to do this. We're here saying this is an opportunity that came up, and we know that most of the people that are part of our church are in the same situation that we're in, which is we love this church. We believe in what we're doing. We're bleeding for this. I'd love to be able to write a huge check, but if I did, it would bounce, So most
Let's
of
all
us
do that together, right?
we could all bounce them together. Be a bouncy house. So we know that that's not really where we're at, but we don't know. Like, the reality is, we don't know where everybody's at financially in our church body, and God could move in somebody who has a chunk of money that they're looking. So we don't know that, and so part of the reason for doing this is to communicate that. And what we might walk away with is, man, we love this. We love the church. We believe in what we're doing. We're not in a position to produce that kind of money in a short amount of time. We go, great. God, you gave us some direction. Good. Let's work on some long-term plans. But we just don't have the feedback to know that's exactly where we're at. Does that?
Yeah, I just was wondering, in order to make any decision, we'll have to have that feedback eventually.
Yeah.
And how is that what is that gonna look like? Because this doesn't answer any of that.
Correct.
Yeah, I'd love to do it, sure, I'll mark that.
Thank you for marking that, by the way. It's fair. Okay, there was one over here. Was it Tim?
So you guys have been tracking the desirability, like from different companies of these buildings for a long time, I'm assuming. We need more space.
Yes.
So you guys have been like following and paying attention and all that. My question is, I don't really know real estate that well, commercial real estate especially. It doesn't seem like that big of a risk if the potential, if say, for instance, like ties wane or whatever, or a tenant goes down, like you could sell them again and get the equity that you put into it. Like maybe an opportunity comes up where we can buy a property and build, and then that would be leverage for that. So you're kind of investing towards that for the future when something else come up. Have you guys thought about, or well, I guess is that true? We can sell them again potentially to make more money.
The question is, if we bought them and we're going to go a different direction, could we sell them? Is that kind of? Yeah, if we bought them, we would always have the option to sell them. Typically, over time, like real estate goes up. That's why they're 4 million instead of 1.6, which they were 8 years ago or something. The other thing too is if you've got an issue with finances or attendance or any of that, you can still lease space out. And so those are kind of like mini insurance policies in terms of the investment. As opposed to if you bought property and you built it and you're responsible for everything, you're kind of stuck with that. You can't really lease a church space out to a beverage company, right? So you have a buffer that's kind of built into it because of the nature of the buildings, which is a pro in that sense. Yes.
One of you mentioned that maybe we have some extra space or more space than would be usual in parking areas. Have we ever considered, like, is it possible to kind of redesign the parking to add some more parking? Because, I mean, the reality is, even if we have all three buildings, we still have this parking lot.
Yeah.
And is that an avenue that has ever been considered?
So the question is, can we reconfigure the parking to get more parking out of it? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. As far as I know, and Chris, maybe you can speak into this, but it's the city or the county that determines how those parking lots are set up. So I don't think that we could respray the lines. Chris, is that true? No. We can't redo it, or we can redo it? We can redo it, okay.
And we could make a certain percentage of them compact, but you could free up some space to,
For all the Suburbans at Coram.
Bicycles only.
Let's charge the Suburbans extra money to park. Sorry, Shane.
So the question is, could we resize the existing parking spots? And yes, we could. We also have the ability to redesignate any type of handicap parking, and so there is some flexibility. I'm not sure how significant that would be with our situation, but
Like, say this corner, for instance, could we design it a little differently so that you had, on a Sunday morning, you had more spots? I mean, even if it's 5 spots here, 5 spots somewhere else, like, if we could do that, then maybe we can still have a net gain of, I don't know, 20 spots.
Yeah.
Which could make a difference, like today.
Yeah.
People coming for third service, literally, we're circling.
Right. If we owned everything and we had occupied everything, we would free up somewhere around 25 additional spots in the parking lot, which if you're at 3 persons per car, you're at 75 extra people per service. I don't know what the actual number is. That's not moving the spaces. That's just freeing up. Like, we have this corner. We don't have business trucks parked in the middle. If we had everything, it's somewhere around 25 to 30 extra spots. And that doesn't include getting space from the adjacent of a parking over there or any of the other parking. That's just utilizing spaces in our space. Heiner.
Has anybody addressed the need for zoning? Are the buildings zoned for continuing church, which means less dollars to the county? And then an additional one is, are you sure that you don't have to pay whatever the tax is for a lease on a business, for a business, to the county?
so the question is, do we know what would exist with land use for the other buildings going from warehouse to church? And the quick answer is a feasibility study would answer that specifically. And the other question, what was the? Oh, tax. And so, yes, we would retain our tax benefits if we purchase the other buildings, especially since they would be consistent with the purposes of our vision and mission, with expanding for a school, expanding for a seminary. And so we're able to do that and not violate that in any way.
So, if we wanted to do the feasibility study, can we put earnest money down, and do we risk losing it if we were to back out?
Part of the question is, if we did a feasibility study, can we put earnest money down? Would we risk losing that? With where we are today, the recommendation from the Finance Committee is not to make any decisions that put earnest money on the line. And we kind of wait to see where it seems that God is leading coming out of this meeting to then have further conversations with locking up funds like that.
Does that answer the question? Okay, here's a question from online. It says, I don't have a question. This is Brian Bailey. Just wanted to tell you, Coram Deo Church, we love you guys and miss you. We're praying for you.
Love you, Brian.
There was a collective sigh, Brian, for you and Angie and the kids. We love you. Come back to Kitsap soon, please. Okay, Rhonda.
Maybe I missed this. Going back to thinking about financing, putting the cash down is a lot. Obviously, we're all wondering how God's gonna answer that, if he does. But I haven't heard, do we have to put that much down? Can we not finance more of it? I don't know that end of it, but can we reduce that?
So the question was, can we reduce the amount of money we put down on the buildings?
Are there other options?
Yeah.
Reducing that number?
Ben or Stuart, do you guys want to, our finance guys, do you want to talk what your thoughts are? Ben's smiling.
I talk all the time, so I'd like to give this a Ben.
Do you want to, let's give him a mic so people can hear. Because there could be some millionaires watching the live stream. Maybe Elon Musk is watching.
So as Stuart and I kind of talked and prayed about it, we were looking at it more as a kind of a risk to the church, and we didn't want to like stretch our means too much. So I think Brandon, you said 2 to 4 times our annual budget. So is what I guess Brandon told me that 2 to 4 times our annual budget is what a bank will lend. So our budget's 700, 800,000. So I guess that would be, we could do more, but I think our perspective was we didn't want to. Yes, having the rental income is great and it helps with the payment, but especially, as our giving has been kind of up and down, we didn't want to overburden the church.
Nothing else. Okay, good job.
Good?
Does that answer? Yeah.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
There's a question on here about, are we looking all over Kitsap or just Central? Regal Cinema shut down in Port Orchard just this week. Curious if that has been considered. It just shut down this week, so we haven't considered that specifically. You did tell me this morning, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if there was an open door to a facility, we haven't talked about this. I don't know that Central is a die on the hill issue.
No.
So if there was a space that opened up, obviously we're going to communicate as a body, but if there's something that was great that opened up and the price was right, like I think we would as a church want to prayerfully consider that and say, there's a lot of people who have been driving from Port Orchard here for a while, and maybe there's some people that are going to drive to Port Orchard for a while. I don't know. So all that to say, I think we would consider that option. Is that all here? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. More questions? Tristan.
So, given we're going to start the school here soon, and given that this venture happened, does the school introduce any risks financially as far as new extra burdens for the church financially that haven't considered in the past and will have to consider later? Will that kind of change the plans at all?
The question is, with the introduction of the Coram Deo Academy, does that introduce any other financial risks to Coram Deo Church moving forward? So some of the structural decisions we have made is that Coram Deo Academy's finances are separate, completely separate from Coram Deo Church's finances. If money was to ever go from the church to the school, it would be because we're choosing to donate money. There can never be a situation where the school will give money to us that's outside of agreed upon maintenance or facilities arrangements. So that provides a type of protection where the church can't just take money from the school, but also vice versa, the school can't just take money from the church. And Rustin and I are coming towards the end of a process of making a recommended budget for the school, which will pass along to the kind of the necessary teams for kind of looking over and approving. But with that, the consultant kind of advises based off of student ratios. It produces so much income and expenses. So we're operating with what is the low level of students to start the school, and the more students that are enrolled, the more net income is produced at the end of the year. But what we're looking at is kind of a relationship between a small responsibility for the school to do some scholarship fundraising with an end goal of low student enrollment as a break-even number. And so that, with us aiming for it to be low, it kind of positions us, if we're average or higher, that the school is paying for itself from day one. Do you want to add on anything with that?
I think that's pretty good. I mean, when you have less enrollment, you have to have less teachers also. So like there's a flexibility with what your costs are based on your intake, and the school itself is contingent upon enrollment, right? So you have to have enrollment in order to have the school. And then that enrollment changes how many teachers. Your biggest cost in our situation is teachers, right? So that's your biggest cost, and then you change that based on threshold. So there's a certain point where if you don't have enough enrollment, it just doesn't make sense to open the school. Like that's a real possibility. It's not something that we're seeing hints of based on our current interests and conversations at all. But when the risk comes up in terms of the school, it would be because of low enrollment. But there's two things you either do when you get too low enrollment. You either can't hire the teachers to do your biggest cost, or you can't do the school because it's that low, right? So, but again, we're not seeing hints of either of those things.
So I guess I'm hearing the school should pay for itself day one.
Yeah, there's.
Not expecting to sponsor it or like give any money up front. Get
The-
the ball rolling. It's already rolling.
Yes, the church is not anticipating to give any money to the school to get it rolling. The school, the life of a private school like this is always going to include fundraising for scholarships. So that's always going to be happening. So there's another avenue for giving.
So the church isn't giving any money, but if the members of the church want to donate to the school, you're free to do that.
Heads.
You got hit twice for donations on this thing.
Lisa?
Is there any consideration if there are people within the church that want to invest in commercial property to form a partnership with the church to help offset? They would also share then in the profits, so that would be a consideration. I mean, it would be a lot of changing, but is that
I like that idea. That's cool.
So have we considered somebody maybe financing it and working with us where we're renting from them or whatever? Yes, we've talked about that. If someone wanted to purchase the space and collect on those rent numbers and had an agreement with us that we would acquire space as it was available and as we were able, we would 100% be open to that. That is one of the reasons we're doing this, because we wanted to kind of cast a broad net. I don't know who's in a position to do that. And it's a little bit awkward to be, hey, you want to pay $4.5 million and get the space so we can rent it, right? So by communicating this broadly, if somebody is here now or somebody knows somebody in that situation or whatever, absolutely. That would could potentially be a really great scenario, which would secure the space for us long term. They can make a profit on their investment, but we have the ability to, I think we'd be very open to that. Good question, Lisa. Thank you. Mr. LeJudas. Yeah.
The question is that maybe there's multiple investors that would like to come together to see this happen. Is that possible?
Yeah. Yeah, so can we have investors, which is what you're asking, which is multiple investors that would, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I would say if you're in that situation tonight, talk to this guy and say, I'm interested in hearing more about that. That's not a commitment. That's not a number. That's just, that way we know who to talk to. Great. Write it on your survey.
Write it on your survey if you're interested in participating in a possible investment opportunity.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, those are two great ideas, and again, part of the reason we're doing this. Okay, we got to close this up because we're a half hour over. So we're going to go. Chris, are you asking a question or making a suggestion?
No, I just had a
Is there any interest in the current owner carrying the loan? He has officially said he's not interested in carrying the loan.
Good question. Ben? Yeah. So what's the next steps for people who are interested in pledging or in potentially investing?
So what we discussed is not coming into this meeting with asking for pledges and coming out of this meeting on getting a read for what does the church, what are we hearing from the church body? If you, we also did not assume that we would be putting families in a reasonable situation to ask them to make a pledge decision tonight either. So we didn't want to have that as a, we're asking you to do this. If you have an idea on what you're interested in, or if you're able to do something and you wanted to communicate that, we would welcome that. But if we leave this meeting, the elders believe God's leading us to say, let's at least pursue this, then what we would do is kind of try to bring together some more intentional communication around what does a pledge or a donation look like for people who are interested. Does that make sense, Ben?
Yeah. So we'll wrap it up with this. Our goal as elders walking out of this was we wanted to get as much feedback as we can. We wanted to get as many questions, and I think there's some really good ideas that came up there with a way to move forward that isn't raising $2 million, but an investing approach. I think that's a really great idea. So we wanted to get as much feedback as we could to try and discern, all right, is this something we should be pursuing? And if it is something we should be pursuing, what would that look like? And so we're trying to collect information. We have an elder meeting on Tuesday morning where we're going to be praying and thinking about these things and not responding tonight, but coming together again and going, okay, what did we hear? What do we think God is up to? And at that point, then we would be able to communicate with the church body, all right, here's some steps that we need to be taking. There's some things we need to figure out in terms of, can we get into that space, Jeff, which you were asking? And what are some specifics in terms of plans to go forward? Those are all things that we can roll out as we walk away from this meeting, having a sense of God's direction in leading. But in addition to all those things, we need to continue to be praying as a church body that God would provide. And it really is a submitting to the will of God. Like, we're trying to do our best to figure out what's going on, but we're finite, we're errant, we could be totally off, and God would be like, you guys are idiots. There's a building over here I've got for you. Just wait, right? We don't know that. And so we want to be praying that God would very clearly steer us, direct us, open doors, close doors. We could get an email tomorrow from the owners like, hey, I accepted the building. Wow, that was really obvious, right? And praise God because he has something else for us. So, but we need as a body to be praying for that and also fasting for that. So there'll probably be, as far as like tangibles moving forward, another season of prayer and fasting specifically for this. Talking to people about that, the investing thing, because like I said earlier, even if these buildings aren't available, we need space. So that might be a way for us to move forward regardless if it's these buildings or not. So is that clear? Lisa's doing this. I can't tell if it's clear, Ben. It is? Okay. You're the last one. No. A different owner owns these two buildings who bought those two buildings from the same person we bought this building from.
Do we know, again, how much time we have to deal with it, to make a decision for them, or that's just up in the air?
We don't know.
It could be sold tomorrow.
It could be sold tomorrow, yeah. I said it was the last one, but Lisa, just for you. Yes. Correct. Correct. Right. Yes. Yeah, we have been very fortunate. You're asking about the parking lots. We've been very fortunate that none of these businesses are open on Sunday, so there isn't really a conflict other than the annoying trucks to get parked in the parking lot. But yes, if somebody moves in here and decides they're doing something on Sundays, we have to accommodate and live with that. Okay, I got to wrap it up because we're only a half hour. Sorry.
The repeat swirl.
What happens if the new owners don't like they do stuff on Sundays with the new businesses and we lose the parking spots? That would be really bad. Sorry.
That would be the Red Sea.
That would be really bad. That would be like Red Sea for the Egyptians. Okay. Aaron, would you close us in prayer?
Let me get the mic for you.
Yeah, we really appreciate you guys coming out. We
Turn in
value-
your surveys as you exit.
Yeah, turn those surveys in. And thank you for giving up your Sunday night. We really appreciate the thoughtful questions. I feel like we've got things to walk away and think through and new ideas, and that's what we wanted to do. So thank you.
Heavenly Father, we put our lives, we put our church, we put this mission into your hands. We ask that you would provide and open doors, that you would save sinners like us, and bring health and growth where there has been brokenness and death. Lord, we want to see your glory move forward, and Lord, we pray that you would give us wisdom, and that you would help us to see where you are leading us as a church. Lord, we know what opportunities in front of us for these two buildings, and we pray, Lord, that you would take this time, the feedback that we get to bring clarity. Lord, we have hope because you are a God who provides. You have always been faithful, and we know that you are able. Lord, we know that you are not done, and so we pray that you would do great things, that you would use us as your people. And we ask all this in your name. Amen.
Amen. All right, surveys, if you can fill those out, drop them in the buckets on your way out. If you are interested in the idea of investments to procure property, you can talk to Brandon now. I just volunteered you. You got netted. You're going to talk to Brandon or send him an email. You can do that as well, but do let him know. We'll make him the point guy for that. And you're dismissed. Go Lions.